The Royal Navy had been intrigued by the use of aircraft for quite some time, and by the middle of World War I they'd put together a random assortment of aircraft-carrying ships of various designs, such as Ark Royal, Campania, Ben Mashri, Engadine, and a number of others. But all of these lacked one feature. They could all launch aircraft in some way, shape or form, but unless those aircraft were seaplanes, they had no way of getting them back, since they lacked a flight deck capable of landing wheeled aircraft. Enter the 6th Duke of Montrose, who also happened to be one of the directors of the shipbuilders Beardmore and Company. For some time he'd been advocating for a sort of combined mothership for both aircraft and torpedo boats, which, at least up top, looked very like what we would now consider to be an aircraft carrier, with one big difference. It had twin islands, one on either side, with bracing between them, from which could be hung a net to catch any overshooting aircraft. By 1916, Beardmore also happened to have a pair of mid-size ocean liners that were sitting partially complete on the slipways. With this happy confluence of events, the Admiralty accepted the design in principle, purchased the more complete of the two ships, and ordered its conversion, whilst taking the design details off for further revision. The funnels, one in each island, were quickly deleted to reduce turbulence, the exhaust gases instead being vented along specially cooled ducts beneath the flight deck to emerge at the aft end of the ship. Wind tunnel tests of a model version showed that the twin islands and their connecting braces would cause another kind of wind tunnel to form, and further information coming in from the installation of fore and aft flight decks on HMS Furious, which suffered greatly from the turbulence caused by its superstructure, led to a further design change, relocating the bridge to just under the flight deck forward and removing the two islands entirely. Thus, now flush-decked, the converted liner was commissioned in September 1918, just before the end of World War I, as HMS Argus. Displacing about 14,500 tons and capable of a stately 20 knots, courtesy of 20,000 shaft horsepower driving 4 screws, she carried a modern armament of 4 single 4-inch anti-aircraft guns and a pair of surface-action-only 4-inch guns, which gave a slight modicum of firepower against a small destroyer, should she happen to encounter one. She possessed very large lifts and a very tall and wide hangar, which would come in useful later in her life, but for now would actually allow her to move multiple aircraft at a time between the flight deck and the hangar. One of her first tasks would have been as the lead ship in the great 1919 air raid on the High Seas Fleet. But the 1918 November armistice removed the chance for a wood and canvas biplane version of Pearl Harbor in Wilhelmshaven, and instead she was used to test a variety of concepts that would be influential in the final iteration of Furious, the ongoing conversion of HMS Eagle, and the design of HMS Hermes, including the temporary installation of a dummy island that was then moved about the flight deck to determine where would be the best place to put such a structure on future aircraft carriers. She went into the interwar period operating somewhere between a dozen and 15 aircraft, depending on the year and aircraft type, and continued evaluating technology and operational concepts, along the way needing a little bit of bulking up below the waterline to compensate for all the extra weight that all the new equipment was bringing to the flight deck. This pushed her up to about 17,000 tons standard displacement. As more carriers came online and the fine details of carrier operations became somewhat more well known, Argus was dispatched on regular duties, spending some time on the China station before being put into ready reserve as a cost-cutting measure at the end of the 1920s. In the late 1930s, it was decided to widen the flight deck, replace the machinery, and then bring her back into service as a training carrier, which would also be able to operate target drones for anti-aircraft practice by other ships. She was able to do this for about a year before World War II broke out, and then she was given an upgraded anti-aircraft suite and pressed into service escorting convoys and ferrying aircraft to and from various theatres, the large elevator area and the capacious hangar meaning that she could operate fixed-wing land-based aircraft, at least as long as they weren't expecting to have to land back on her again. From 1939 to 1943, she was almost entirely occupied in this role, largely feeding aircraft into the Mediterranean theatre, especially Malta, usually with a small number of carrier-capable aircraft aboard for self-defence, although she was also occasionally to be found in frontline duties when times got really desperate, usually either acting as an anti-submarine carrier or potentially even a fighter carrier to cover a convoy or another ship on operations. Lightly damaged while supporting Operation Torch, she was refitted and reclassified again, this time as an escort carrier, albeit that she was used mainly for training until late 1944, whereupon she was again changed to become an accommodation ship at Chatham, where she lasted until 1946, whereupon she was sold for scrap.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.